The cheerful jingle of my coffee shop bell always meant a familiar face, until the day a little girl, soaked and alone, walked in and brought with her a silence that would awaken Harmony Creek's darkest, oldest secret. The bell above my coffee shop door has a cheerful little jingle. It's a sound I've known my whole life, a sound that usually means a familiar face is coming in for their morning latte or a slice of my lemon drizzle cake. Here in Harmony Creek, you get to know the sounds, the faces, the routines. It's a town built on predictability, a place where the biggest news is usually Mrs. Gable's prize-winning petunias. But on that Tuesday, when the bell jingled, the sound wasn't cheerful. It was a prelude to a silence that fell over the shop so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Standing in the doorway was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, with big brown eyes wide with a fear that seemed too old for her face. She was a tiny thing, swimming in a thin, faded pink coat that looked like it had seen better days, probably several winters ago. Her shoes were soaked through, leaving tiny, sad puddles on the welcome mat. In her arms she clutched a threadbare teddy bear, its button eyes staring out with the same vacant shock as hers. And she was all alone. In a town like Harmony Creek, a child is never alone. They're with a parent, a grandparent, a gaggle of friends. But she stood there, framed by the cold November rain, a solitary figure against the gray afternoon. I put down the cup I was polishing and moved around the counter. A few of the regulars, old Mr. Henderson and the ladies from the book club, lowered their newspapers and conversations, their gazes fixed on the small child. "Hey there, sweetie," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Are you lost? Where's your mom or dad?" She just shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Her bottom lip trembled, and she hugged the teddy bear tighter, as if it were a shield. She took a hesitant step inside, the bell jingling softly as the door swung shut behind her, cutting off the sound of the rain and sealing us all in this strange, new reality. Her eyes scanned the room, not looking at any of us directly, but seeming to take in the warmth, the smell of coffee and baked bread, the low murmur of conversation that had just died. Then her gaze landed on me. Her voice, when it came out, was barely a whisper, a fragile thread of sound. "Please," she said, her eyes pleading, "can I stay here? It's cold." My heart just broke. It shattered into a million pieces right there on the checkered floor of my shop. Before I could even answer, I was pulling out a stool from the corner, guiding her to it, and wrapping her in one of the clean aprons I had behind the counter. It was way too big for her, but it was warm and dry. I rushed to make her a hot chocolate, my hands moving on autopilot, while my mind raced. Where did she come from? Our town isn't that big. I know every family with a child her age, and I had never, ever seen this little girl before. Mr. Henderson, a retired police officer, hobbled over. "Sarah," he said in his low grumble, "you need to call Sheriff Brody. This ain't right." He was right, of course. I knew the protocol. But looking at her, sipping the hot chocolate with 2 hands to keep the mug steady, her small body shivering, the last thing I wanted to do was introduce official procedure into the situation. She seemed so fragile, like a little bird that had fallen from its nest. But I had to. I made the call. Sheriff Brody arrived in less than 10 minutes. He's a good man, born and raised here, just like me. He knelt down to her level, his voice gentle. "Hey there, little one. I'm Sheriff Brody. What's your name?" The girl looked from him to me, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of panic. I gave her a small, encouraging nod. She swallowed hard and whispered, "Lily." "That's a beautiful name, Lily," Brody said. "Can you tell me where your parents are?" She shook her head again, more firmly this time. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her teddy bear. "I don't have any," she said, her voice flat. The air went out of the room. Brody and I exchanged a look. "Everyone's got parents, Sweet Pea," he said softly. "Maybe they're just waiting for you at home. Can you tell us where home is?" That's when the tears started, silent tears that just rolled down her dusty cheeks and dripped onto the worn fur of her bear. "Barnaby is my family," she sobbed quietly. "Only Barnaby." It was agonizing. Brody tried a few more questions, but she clammed up completely, retreating into a world where only she and her bear existed. He eventually sighed and stood up, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah, I have to take her down to the station. We'll get child services involved. They'll find her a safe place to stay for the night while we figure this out." I felt a surge of protest. Handing her over to strangers? But what else could we do? I knelt in front of her. "Lily, it's going to be okay. Sheriff Brody is going to help. You're safe now." I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince her or myself. She just stared at me, her eyes hollow. As Brody gently took her hand to lead her out, his movements were slow, careful. She didn't resist, just followed like a little automaton. But as she stood up from the stool, her oversized coat shifted. Something small and metallic slipped from her pocket, falling to the floor with a distinct clink. We all froze. Brody bent down to pick it up. It wasn't a toy or a coin. It was a key. A large, ornate, old-fashioned brass key, the kind you'd see in a historical movie. And attached to it, on a faded leather tag, was an engraved crest. It was a crest every single person in Harmony Creek would recognize in an instant. It was the crest of the Blackwood family, the founding family of our town. The family that had died out decades ago, and the key, I knew with a sickening lurch in my stomach, belonged to the one place in this town that had been locked up and abandoned for over 50 years, the sprawling derelict Blackwood Manor on the hill. Sheriff Brody turned the heavy brass key over in his palm, his brow furrowed. The silence in my shop was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the drumming of rain against the window. Every eye was on that key. The Blackwood crest wasn't just a symbol, it was a ghost story, a piece of local folklore we all grew up with. The wealthy, eccentric Blackwoods, the mysterious fire that consumed the manor and the entire family in one night, save for the infant daughter, Eleanor, whose body was never found. It was the town's one great tragedy, our one dark secret. This is impossible," Mr. Henderson muttered, voicing what we were all thinking. "That house has been sealed since the fire. My father was on the volunteer fire crew. He said they locked the gates and boarded the windows themselves." Brody looked from the key to Lily, who was watching him with an unnerving stillness. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, solemn watchfulness. It was as if she knew the power of the object he held. "Lily," Brody said, his voice strained, "where did you get this key?" "It's the front door key," she said simply, as if explaining that the sky was blue. "Mommy said to use it if I got locked out." Mommy. The word hung in the air, heavy and strange. Brody shot me a look, 1,000 questions passing between us in a single glance. He made a decision. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and official, "I need you to close up shop. I want you to come with us. She seems to trust you. I don't want to scare her any more than she already is." My heart hammered against my ribs. Go to Blackwood Manor, the place we used to dare each other to touch the gates of on Halloween? But I looked at Lily's small hand, which had somehow found its way into mine, and I nodded. There was no other choice. The drive up Old Mill Road was tense. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and Brody's cruiser wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge. The manor was perched on a hill overlooking the town, and as we rounded the final bend, it emerged from the mist like a monster waking from a long slumber. It was a Gothic nightmare of sharp angles and darkened windows, draped in ivy that looked like skeletal fingers clutching the stone. The wrought iron gates, bearing the same crest as the key, were rusted but stood imposing and tall. Brody got out and examined the heavy chain and padlock securing them. It was ancient, thick with rust. It hadn't been opened in decades, but then he noticed it, a smaller, almost hidden pedestrian gate, built into the stone wall a few yards down, partially obscured by overgrown bushes. Its lock was old, but it wasn't chained. He returned to the car, his face grim. "Stay here with her," he ordered, and walked back to the small gate. We watched through the rain-streaked windshield as he inserted the key Lily had dropped. After a moment's resistance, we heard a distinct, grating click that was audible even over the storm. The gate swung inward with a low groan. My blood ran cold. He motioned for me to bring Lily. I unbuckled her, and she followed me out into the rain without a word, clutching Barnaby to her chest. We walked through the gate and onto the manor grounds. The air here was different, still, heavy, smelling of damp earth and decay. A stone path, cracked and overrun with weeds, led to the colossal front doors. Brody tried the key on the main lock. It slid in perfectly. With a deafening series of clicks and groans from the ancient tumblers, the lock turned. The massive oak door swung open into a gaping blackness. The air that rushed out was stale, carrying the scent of dust and forgotten time. Brody shone his flashlight inside, the beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating a universe of dust motes dancing in the air. We stepped inside, into the grand foyer. A huge, sweeping staircase lay ahead, and the ceiling soared 2 stories above us, lost in the shadows. Everything, the marble floors, the velvet settees, the grand portraits on the walls whose faces were obscured by grime, was draped in a thick grey blanket of dust and cobwebs. It was a tomb, except it wasn't. In a corner near the base of the staircase was a small, clean space. A child's sleeping bag was laid out neatly on the floor. Beside it sat a small stack of picture books, their covers bright and new, a jarring splash of color in the monochrome decay. Next to them were 3 empty cans of baked beans and a plastic water bottle. It was a tiny, desperate island of life in an ocean of abandonment. We stood there, stunned into silence. How could a child live like this? Before Brody or I could speak, Lily let go of my hand. She pointed a tiny finger up the grand, shadowed staircase. Her voice echoed in the cavernous space, clear as a bell. "Up there," she whispered. "Mommy's room." A shiver traced its way down my spine. Brody put a hand on his service weapon, a reflexive, nervous gesture. He nodded at me, and together we started up the stairs, our footsteps echoing ominously. The second-floor hallway was a corridor of closed doors and deepening shadows. Lily walked ahead of us with a strange certainty and stopped in front of the last door on the left. Unlike the others, it was clean, the wood polished, the brass handle gleaming faintly in the beam of Brody's flashlight. She pushed it open. The room inside was perfect. It was a woman's bedroom, preserved flawlessly, as if under glass. A 4-poster bed was made with a lace canopy, a silver-backed brush set lay on a vanity, and perfume bottles sat stoppered on a tray. There was a layer of dust, yes, but it was light, not the thick, suffocating shroud that covered the rest of the house. It was as if time had moved differently in here, and on the nightstand next to the bed sat a single object that was completely free of dust, a small, ornate silver picture frame. Brody moved towards it cautiously, picking it up. I leaned in beside him, my breath catching in my throat. It was an old black-and-white photograph. It showed a radiantly beautiful woman with dark hair swept up in an elegant 1950 style, wearing a string of pearls. She was holding a newborn baby, wrapped in a lace blanket. I recognized the woman instantly from the historical photos in the town library. It was Isabella Blackwood, the matriarch, the woman who had died in the fire 70 years ago. But it was the baby that made the world tilt on its axis. The baby in her arms, with its impossibly large dark eyes staring directly into the camera, was Lily. My mind simply refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I stared at the photograph, the grainy black and white image seeming to swirl before me. It was Lily. There was no doubt. The same wide, soulful eyes, the same button nose, the same distinct shape of her mouth. Yet she was being held by a woman who had been dead for 70 years, in a photograph that was clearly just as old. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I looked from the infant in the picture to the little girl standing beside us, her face a pale oval in the gloom. It was the same face. "Brody," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "What is this? This is impossible." He was speechless, turning the silver frame over and over in his hands as if the back of it might offer some logical explanation. He shone his flashlight around the immaculate, dusty room. "There has to be an explanation," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "A trick. A relative that looks just like her. A copy of an old photo." But his voice lacked conviction. We both knew what we were looking at felt deeper and stranger than a simple family resemblance. Lily, oblivious to our existential crisis, walked over to the vanity table. She picked up the silver-backed brush. Mommy brushes my hair with this, she said quietly, her reflection staring back at us from the dusty mirror. She says it's important to look nice. The simple domestic statement in this mausoleum of a house was profoundly unsettling. Lily, Brody said, kneeling down again, his voice carefully controlled. Who is your mummy? Is she the lady in this picture? Lily nodded. That's Mommy Isabella, she said. She then pointed to another portrait on the wall, one I hadn't noticed before, hanging in the deepest shadows. Brody swung his light towards it. It was a painting of a young woman, perhaps in her late teens, with the same dark eyes as Isabella and Lily. She looked sad, almost haunted. And that's Mommy Eleanor. Eleanor. The name hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor Blackwood. The infant daughter who supposedly vanished the night of the fire, her body never recovered. The town's enduring mystery. According to the town records, if Eleanor were alive today, she would be 70 years old. Two mummies? I asked gently, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Mommy Isabella is the queen of the house, Lily explained, with the simple logic of a child. She stays in her pictures. Mommy Eleanor takes care of me. She brings me food and books. She says the outside world is bad. She says we have to stay hidden here, where it's safe. Where is she now, Lily? Brody asked, his gaze darting around the room, into the dark corners. Where is Mommy Eleanor? Lily's face fell. She's sick, she whispered, her lip trembling. She's been sleeping for a long, long time. In the cold room. She told me if she slept too long, I had to go find help. She said to find someone with kind eyes. Lily looked up at me, and my heart clenched. So I found you. The cold room. A dread washed over me that was deeper and more chilling than the house itself. Brody seemed to feel it too. He stood up, his face set like stone. Lily, can you show us the cold room? She nodded solemnly and led us out of the bedroom, back into the dark hallway. She didn't lead us downstairs. Instead, she guided us to a narrow, steep set of stairs at the far end of the hall, half hidden behind a tapestry depicting a grim hunting scene. The air grew noticeably colder as we descended, the stone walls slick with moisture. The stairs led down into what must have been the manor's old cellars. The smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, filled the air. The flashlight beam cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing stone archways and old wine racks, most of them empty and shrouded in cobwebs. Lily walked with purpose to a heavy wooden door at the far end of the cellar, secured not with a lock, but with a heavy iron bolt. She was too small to reach it. Brody slid the bolt back. The sound echoed loudly in the subterranean silence. He pushed the door open and took a step inside, shining his light into the space. I peered over his shoulder, a knot of pure fear tightening in my gut. It was a root cellar, its shelves lined with dusty, empty canning jars. But in the center of the room, on a simple wooden cot, was a figure lying under a thick pile of blankets. Brody moved forward slowly, his hand once again on his weapon. I stayed at the doorway, one hand on Lily's shoulder, holding her back. He reached the cot and gently, cautiously, pulled back the corner of the top blanket. And then he just froze. He stood utterly still for a solid 10 seconds, his back to me. Then he let out a choked sound, a sharp intake of breath that was part shock, part horror. He stumbled back a step, his flashlight beam wavering wildly across the stone walls before he steadied it again on the cot. "Brody, what is it?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. "What did you find?" He didn't turn around. He couldn't seem to tear his eyes away from the cot. "Sarah," he said, his voice ragged and strained, unlike I had ever heard it before. "You need to get the girl out of here. Right now. Take her back to the car and call for backup. Call for the state coroner." My blood turned to ice. "Coroner?" I took a step forward, needing to see, but he held up a hand, a sharp, commanding gesture. "Don't, Sarah. Just don't look. Get her out of here." His voice was so raw, so filled with a genuine primal horror, that I obeyed without question. I scooped Lily up into my arms, her small body feeling impossibly light. She buried her face in my shoulder, hiding from whatever her protector had seen. I turned and practically ran up the cellar stairs, my mind screaming, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. What could be in that room? What could possibly have shaken a seasoned lawman like Brody to his core? I fumbled my way through the dark foyer and out the front door into the now lessening rain. I buckled a silent Lily into the back of the cruiser and grabbed Brody's radio from the dashboard. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely press the button. As I called in the location and the request for backup, my eyes were drawn back to the imposing, dark silhouette of the manor. And that's when I saw it. In one of the highest windows of the attic, a single flickering light had just appeared. It was the warm, unsteady glow of a candle, a small, lonely flame against the infinite darkness, as if someone up there was watching us. That single flickering candle held me mesmerized. It was impossible. The house had no power, no gas. It was a dead place. Yet there it was, a tiny, defiant spark of life in a top-floor window, a silent observer in the gathering dusk. My blood ran cold, and I instinctively locked the cruiser doors, my hand resting protectively on Lily's knee. She had fallen asleep in the back, her small face peaceful for the first time since she'd walked into my life just a few hours ago. The wail of sirens grew from a distant hum to a roar, and soon the manor's driveway was flooded with the flashing red and blue lights of half the county's police force and an ambulance. Paramedics rushed inside while deputies started securing the scene. I saw Brody emerge from the front doors, his face pale and grim, talking in low, urgent tones to a state detective. He caught my eye and walked over to the cruiser, his boots crunching on the wet gravel. He leaned against the door, looking exhausted. "You okay?" he asked. "What was on that cot, Brody?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Who is in there?" He sighed, running a hand over his face. "It's a woman, or—" "It was. She's been deceased for a while, Sarah. Maybe a week. She's elderly. Very elderly." He paused, looking back at the house. "We found a wallet in a drawer upstairs. The ID is old, expired decades ago, but the picture is clear. It's Eleanor Blackwood." The name hung between us again, thick with impossibility. "But—" "Eleanor would be 70. You said the woman was very elderly." "I'd guess late 80s, maybe 90, he said, his voice heavy with confusion. "Nothing about this makes sense. The coroner will have to figure it out. But that's not the strangest part." He lowered his voice, leaning closer. "We found journals, dozens of them, in that bedroom. They seem to be written by Eleanor. They span decades. The last entry was a week ago. It just says, 'The cycle is almost complete. She knows what to do.'" Before I could ask what that meant, a deputy called out to Brody. They had made another discovery. He gave me a tired look and headed back inside. I sat in the car, the flashing lights painting the scene in surreal strokes of color, my mind reeling. Eleanor Blackwood, aged 90, dead in the cellar. Lily, her spitting image as a baby, found with a key. Journals talking about a cycle. And the candle, still flickering in the attic window. A while later, Brody came back, accompanied by a woman in a detective's suit. He looked even more shaken than before. "Sarah," he said, his voice strained. They found the attic. It's a nursery. A perfectly preserved 1950s-style nursery. Crib, rocking chair, toys, all of it. And on the wall, there are photographs. Dozens of them." He swallowed hard. "They're all of little girls, from every decade between the 1950s and now. They're all wearing the same clothes, holding the same teddy bear. And Sarah, they're all Lily." It took a moment for the words to sink in, and when they did, the world seemed to fall away. Every photo was of a different girl, but they were all identical. The same face, the same eyes. It was a gallery of ghosts, a timeline of impossible children. The detective, a woman named Carter, took over. "We believe Eleanor Blackwood did survive the fire," she explained, her voice calm and professional, a stark contrast to the madness of the situation. "We think she was disfigured or traumatized and lived here as a recluse her entire life. Her journal entries are disturbed. She talks about preserving the Blackwood line, about finding girls who looked like she did as a baby, bringing them here, and raising them in complete isolation as Eleanor. When they got too old, around 7 or 8, she would make them leave, send them away, and she would find another one. My stomach churned. She kidnapped them? It seems so, Carter said grimly. From orphanages, foster homes, transients, children who wouldn't be easily missed, she'd raise each one as her own in this bizarre time capsule before starting the cycle over. Our Lily is just the latest in a long, tragic line. It was horrifying. This lonely, disturbed old woman stealing children to endlessly recreate her own lost childhood. The woman in the cellar wasn't 90, she was 70. But a life of isolation, malnutrition, and madness had aged her beyond her years. The mommy Isabella in the picture was her mother, a ghost she worshipped, and she had become Mommy Eleanor to a succession of stolen children. When she knew she was dying, she gave this Lily the key and a final instruction. Go find help. She had set the last of her stolen daughters free. The case became a statewide sensation, of course. The discovery in Blackwood Manor was the darkest story Harmony Creek had ever known. Investigators eventually identified 2 of the other Lilies from the photographs. They were women in their 30s and 40s now, living troubled lives in other states, both having been passed through the foster system with no memory of their first 7 years, just a vague, dreamlike recollection of a big, dark house and a sad mother. As for my Lily, she had no one. She was a ghost, a child with no past and no identity. Child Services was prepared to put her into the system, where she'd become just another face in the crowd. I couldn't let that happen. After she'd walked into my coffee shop, after she'd looked at me with those old, frightened eyes, a part of her had become a part of me. My husband and I had always wanted children, but we were never able. That night, looking at Lily sleeping in the back of a police cruiser, I knew what I had to do. It was a long, difficult process, filled with paperwork and interviews and psych evaluations. But we fought for her. We showed them she wasn't just a case file. She was a little girl who loved hot chocolate and drawing pictures of teddy bears. A little girl who deserved a real home, a real name, and a real family. 6 months later, she became our daughter. We named her Hope, because that's what she was. Hope for a new beginning. A life outside the shadows of that dark, sad house on the hill. The manor was eventually condemned and torn down by the town council, erasing the physical scar from our landscape. But for me, the memory remains. Sometimes late at night, I'll watch Hope sleeping, her face so peaceful, and I'll think of that first day. I'll think of the cheerful jingle of a bell, the quiet request for shelter, and the little girl who walked out of a ghost story and into my life, finally breaking the cycle and finding her way home.